it was a quarterback-driven draft. This is a quarterback-driven league. So we saw that unfold tonight.
Let's start with the quarterbacks. Debo wants us to get right into the grades. Quick reaction grades, and then we'll circle back here. Bears, Caleb Williams, number 1.
A.
The Commanders right after that, Jaden Daniels.
A.
Patriots did move off the spot, Drake May.
A.
Okay, this is getting repetitive here. Okay.
I'm a little bit more generous than Pete Prisco was earlier in the show.
Let's see. At number 8, the Falcons take Michael Penix Jr.
Ooh, that one is a little bit peculiar in my mind.
Grade. You can say.
Well, I'm going to say this. Are we grading the move or are we grading the player?
We're not grading the player. We're grading the situation in which the player landed.
Okay, the situation the player landed D, but I think the player is a good football player. Is going to be a really good quarterback in this league.
Right, and in my final big board, I had Michael Penix Jr. just a hair ahead of J.J. McCarthy. That's ended up playing out in real time.
So we don't want to punish the player.
Not
we
at
just
all.
want to punish.
Question the move.
Question the move, not the player.
And we'll talk about that in more detail in a second. I'm going to get through these quick grades here. At 10, the Vikings only had to move up 1 spot for J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, no, and I thought that was a B+.
B+. And finally, and we talked about this earlier on the 2 p.m. show, CBS Sports Network will be on Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network again, previewing day 2. But we mentioned rumors that maybe Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos were going to be married, and now they are officially married at 12. What's the grade on that?
I think that's a C. And in my opinion, we saw what Sean Payton did with Drew Brees, but we also saw what Sean Payton did with Russell Wilson, and that didn't work out very well. So This is handpicked by Sean Payton. They had to get a quarterback coming out of this draft. They got the 6th quarterback probably on everybody's boards. I don't know how many people actually had him as a first-round talent. It's going to be interesting to see how it transitioned. The offense he ran in Oregon to what he's going to run in Denver. But Sean Payton, you got to trust him as a quarterback developer. We'll see that unfold over the next couple of years.
All right. And 6 quarterbacks in the first 12 picks, that's never happened in human history. We've had 6 quarterbacks go in the first round, but you have to go back to 1983, in which Dan Marino was one of the last quarterbacks in that first round and ended up being one of the best quarterbacks. Obviously, John Elway was in that class. But in terms of our purposes here, let's stick with 12 and Bo Nix for a moment. And you mentioned Russ Wilson and Sean Payton being like oil and water. The difference for me, at least on the surface, is that Sean Payton got to pick this quarterback. And that's a huge deal, right?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. This is his hand-picked quarterback, so he is going to be judged off how Bo Nix develops.
And the other issue in my mock draft that was outlandish, one might call it, because it had 7 trades in it, mostly at the top. And you pointed this out. The Broncos didn't have the ammunition draft-wise to move up if they wanted to. But let's talk about the team that traded up from 11, not to 3 or 4, but to 10. The Vikings had 10. They had pick number 23, which they traded back into the first round a few weeks ago with the Houston Texans. And we were all convinced, I would imagine you were too, that they were going to have to get off those 2 first to get up to the top 5 for J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, no, and I think as they saw it unfold, and none of the quarterbacks, they went 1, 2, 3. And then the Giants did not take a quarterback. They went with Malik Neighbors. Then they knew that J.J. McCarthy was eventually going to fall to them. I don't know what happened at 10 with the New York Jets, why they made that flip. I imagine maybe the Las Vegas Raiders or even the Denver Broncos were trying to maybe jump the Minnesota Vikings, especially after Michael Penix Jr. went at 8. So J.J. McCarthy was maybe the last true first-rounder left. So they did a move to make sure that they got the quarterback they wanted, even though it was up 1 spot.
And you thought maybe something could have been up when that trade happened for the reasons you're laying out. But that's the price of poker if you're the Vikings. You can't mess around there.
No, and you needed to come out with a quarterback. We say this all the time. Last year we said the Houston Texans. This year, Minnesota Vikings were in that boat, and that's why they probably made that move earlier in the month or way back in March or whenever they made that trade with the Houston Texans to make sure they were going to land a quarterback and had enough ammunition to do that if they needed to.
So I'm just going to touch on this briefly because we want to stick on these quarterbacks for a while because obviously they're the engine that drives the NFL to some degree. But again, the Vikings kept pick 23, then they traded up to pick 17, and they got your best edge rusher, Dallas Turner. A lot of teams' best edge rusher, Dallas Turner, even though he wasn't the first edge rusher off the board. We'll talk about that in a second. But this feels like, just preliminarily, if we're giving grades, J.J. McCarthy, trade up 1 spot. Trade up a few more spots for Dallas Turner, and you come out of the first round with that, and you have your 2025 first rounder. This is as close to an A+ you can get.
Yeah, no, and I thought it was an A draft for the Minnesota Vikings to go and get Dallas Turner, especially when they lose DJ Wanham, especially when they lose Danielle Hunter.
Yep.
I know they signed Grenard from Houston, Van Ginkel from Miami, but now to add a premier pass rusher like a Dallas Turner, they have to get pressure on the quarterback in order for Brian Flores' defense to thrive, and I think they were able to accomplish that by getting Dallas Turner.
All right. Let's talk about 8. We're going in reverse order here, working our way back up to the top, where this is curious. And in the moment it was curious, you had stepped out. We were in the studio with our buddy Joe Musso. You stepped out for a moment. The pick happened, and when you came back, you thought we were kidding when we told you Michael Penix Jr. ended up in Atlanta. We listened to the post-draft first-round press conference from the GM and the head coach, Terry Fontenot, and Raheem Morris. And I get the explanation on some level. They don't want to be picking this high in the near future. They have Kirk Cousins on the 4-year, $180 million deal, not $90 million guaranteed. And to ensure that they got their quarterback, they went ahead and took Michael Penix Jr. at 8. It doesn't make sense on any level. And what's compounding things, and one of the first things you said before we saw the report, and Diana Rossini was one of the first people to report it, Kirk Cousins found out when we found out. They called him as they were on the clock, and they had previously, according to reports, told Kirk that they were going to take a quarterback probably on day 2. A lot of moving parts. How do you wrap your head around it if you're Kirk and his agent? And how, as a Falcons fan, are you making sense of this when Byron Murphy II was there? Dallas Turner, Latu, Jared Verse were there. Cornerback, it doesn't matter. Even if you took Roma Dunze there, which we gave our buddy Brian McFadden a hard time about on the pre-draft mock draft we did yesterday. This feels like the craziest of crazy picks.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't understand it.
And again, not because of Michael Penix Jr.
No, we just got to be clear because we think both of us think Michael Penix Jr. As a football player and as a quarterback, we talked maybe the purest thrower out of any of these quarterbacks that came out in the draft. So the moves that the Atlanta Falcons made this offseason, signing Kirk Cousins, getting Mooney from Chicago, getting Rondell Moore from Arizona, was it kind of okay, we can win the NFC South. Now, if we can add to the defense in the draft, this should give us the beat to potentially be the league dog in the NFC South and maybe advance in the playoffs. But a move like this, and I get the explanation. When you hear it, it's like, well, we're planning for the future as well because they don't think they'll be picking in the top 10 ever again. So this was a little bit like, if you want to compare it to Green Bay when they had Brett Favre and they drafted Aaron Rodgers.
Yep.
When they had Aaron Rodgers, they drafted Jordan Love. But those picks were in the 20s. Those weren't in the top 10. You had an opportunity to maybe take a top 10 player that would made not only a difference this year, but down the road, and they elected to go quarterback. Now, who knows? Because Kirk Cousins has, I think they can get out of the contract after the next 2 years. But who knows what the quarterback class, it may not be as strong next year, but I don't even know what the 2026 class is going to look like yet. You can probably have filled it then. So,
by the way, my first overall pick in 2026, Arch Manning, just so you know. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, they don't have to worry about it because apparently they're going to be picking in the 20s or 32nd, according to them. So it was just hard to kind of wrap around what they were thinking. I think, like you explained it, you understand it a little bit about getting that position solidified, not only with Kirk Cousins in the now, but also with Michael Penix Jr. in the future, so they don't have to worry about this position for maybe, hopefully the next 10 years, and they can build around these two quarterbacks.
And the other comp I made, you mentioned Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. The other comp for me was just last year when the Detroit Lions took Hendon Hooker, but they took Hendon Hooker in the 3rd round. He's an older player. I think he's 25 now. And Jared Goff is your guy. And has Jared Goff gotten his new deal yet?
No.
So he's set to get that new deal probably. But you understood it in the 3rd round, not necessarily in the 1st. And Michael Penix, the expectations were that he was going to probably be a 1st-round pick. And it just didn't – the fit didn't make sense, especially when if you told me they were getting Grady Jarrett 2.0 and Byron Murphy, I would imagine the fans would have been excited. I would imagine the locker room would have not been confused. And if you're a general manager, first of all, the owner has to – okay this, so clearly Arthur Blank's down with it. But are you concerned about how this affects, number one, your franchise quarterback, Kirk Cousins, but also the locker room as a whole?
No, I know Kirk Cousins and the type of person he is, so he'll be very accepting. He'll help bring along Michael Penix Jr., although I know he's very competitive and thinks he's going to be the guy for the next 3 or 4 years there at least. The question I'm going to ask you is this. If Michael Penix Jr. was your guy, and everybody anticipated him being a first-round pick, but I don't think anyone anticipated him being in the top 10. Why would you spend all that money on Kirk Cousins knowing that you could probably get Michael Penix Jr. with the 8th overall pick?
All right, here's the deal. Debo just showed me this clip of what looks like Terry Fontenot explaining to Arthur Blank. They're having a conversation after the pick. Maybe he's explaining the pick. Maybe they're talking about why didn't they give Rick Spielman dinner up here in Stamford, Connecticut. But here's the question to you. Do you have to justify this to the owner?
You're not doing this move without getting a check mark next to the name from the ownership.
So they're not calling Mr. Blank the same time they're calling Kirk.
No, God, no. No, this I would be shocked if that happened. This had to be discussed weeks before and even going into the final meetings today.
And the other thing you brought up earlier when we were talking about this on HQ is that even before they signed Kirk Cousins, the Falcons did, they knew who Michael Penix Jr. was, and they probably had a good sense, based on the same people that we talked to, that Michael Penix Jr. was almost certainly going to be middle of the first round, best case. And he went to the Senior Bowl, and he was okay. He didn't set the world on fire. There was no buzz on Michael Penix Jr. coming out. So they knew that, even though they may have told a different story in the press conference on Thursday night.
Yeah, no, and that's what we were just talking about, is that if you knew Michael Penix Jr. was going to be available mid to late and you have a top 10 pick, then why sign Kirk Cousins to that kind of contract knowing that for sure you're going to be able to get Michael Penix Jr. at number 8 overall? And he's a little bit older. He's played 6 years of college football. He's going to have to sit, but out of all these quarterbacks, he may have been the most ready to come in as a rookie and make a contribution, besides Caleb Williams.
I haven't scrolled the social media, so I don't know if there's a more peculiar pick we've seen in terms of fit than this one. Maybe Jalen Reagor going to the Eagles before Justin Jefferson was drafted.
Move on.
That was more for Debo than for you. So that's interesting, but we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. Maybe less interesting because the Patriots actually say put at 3, because we were trying to convince ourselves, me in particular, that maybe they trade down if the draft haul was there. They say put, they take Drake May. That feels like a layup.
Yeah, no, and he was the second or third best quarterback, depending on which team you talk to. We all talked about he had a better 2022 season than he did in 2023. Didn't have the same weapons around him. Tried to force things, but he's only 21 years old. He does have a track record of being a very good collegiate football player, and he has a high ceiling. Mm-hmm. So he has an opportunity to come in. He doesn't have to start right away. He'll be behind a great mentor in Jacoby Brissett. And then when he's ready, he'll be able to step in, and hopefully New England got their quarterback issues resolved, because they can't continue with what they did with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi.
No, and obviously there's a new coaching staff. Elliott Wolf's now the general manager there. Pick 2, Commander Jaden Daniels, which we had known for what felt like maybe a week or so, and then the Bears and Caleb Williams. We don't have to spend long on those two, but I'll just say this about Caleb Williams. It feels like he goes to a pretty unique situation for a team picking first overall, and that team has a chance to win. I'll give you the over-under right now, the Ryan Wilson over-under. 9.5 games next year. They're going to win more or less than 9.5 games.
No, I think they'll be right in that. I think they'll be in the mix for the NFC North. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays on. But look at all the weapons they were able to put around Caleb Williams. And you want to talk about winners and losers. Caleb Williams is a winner because of all the weapons they put around him.
Huge winner. And we'll talk about pick 9 in a little more detail. But Roman Dunze in a bad consolation prize after Caleb Williams. 4 quarterbacks in the top 8 picks. That's a record. 5 in the top 10, 6 in the top 12. 8 quarterbacks and wide receivers in the top 10 pick. The first defensive player dinged off the board till pick 15. 14 straight picks on the one side of the ball, obviously. 23 offensive players taken in the first round. And you said it, this is an offensive league. And the bad teams are stocking up on offense, and the good teams are circling back and get the defenders to try to stop those bad teams from trying to get better.
Yeah, no, this is a quarterback-driven league, and that's why you've seen the 6 quarterbacks go, because you have to take a swing if you don't have one. You have to protect the quarterback, so you've seen the run on the offensive lineman, and you have to have guys that will be able to catch the ball and make explosive plays because of the way the NFL has become a space game on offense
Mm-hmm.
and how important that receiver position is. I think that's why you've seen the runs that we saw on the offensive linemen, the quarterbacks, and the receivers.